All right, you guys are on.
Printed 5. Thanks, Bill. Hey, sorry you guys aren't here. We're hopefully the sound isn't too loud, but we're going to get started and just kind of roll through, and then we will. If you guys have any questions, hit us up, or the group. We just talked about that. That's a supportive group, and we have 3 veterans from the last group that crushed it, and they're gonna. 4. Well, you're not in this right now. He didn't really crush it. No, he didn't. Obviously, everybody did amazing. I truly am proud of everybody in that, and I'm ready, excited to get proud of this group too. So. Let's start with really, what we're going to do here, and it's, I think, under the heading really of evolving and developing a relationship with food, right? Is kind of what this turned into. And somebody just, did you just post that about a relationship with food? I think, Carrie?
I think so. Or I wrote to you about it.
Or you wrote to me about it. That's what it was about. That is what really stuck with you out of that. And I think that's almost become part of a heading for what this is. You develop a real relationship with food. And the way that when this whole thing started, and it started with a talk in here and then rolled into this group, is that I just take a step back and say, so Buddha has a quote that really resonates with me, that I kind of live my life by. It's what we think about, we bring about. Thoughts become things, right? That focus of what that is really is what creates our reality. And I won't go down the quantum rabbit hole, but I study a lot of quantum physics and quantum mechanics and neurolinguistic programming about how literally that does create your reality, right? So that aside, irrespective of beliefs around things, it does matter about what we are thinking. And so I like to take a step back and say, what influences the thoughts that we have? You're probably thinking right now, what does this have to do about changing my body? But you'll see how it kind of fits together, and it really does, because it's about a holistic approach from this. So if thoughts become things, and what we think about, we bring about, it's important to understand what influences our thoughts, right? So the way I like to start it there is I know when I was a kid, we were told, hey, you are what you eat, right? And so from that, and it makes great sense, right? And so if you expand that, as I think about it, especially in today's society, more than ever, is that we are what we consume. So it's not just the food that we eat, but obviously the food that we eat plays a large role in it, but it's the social media we engage in, it's the conversations we have, it's the friends in our lives. There's a saying that is, show me the 5 closest people in your life and I'll show you exactly who you are, right? So this isn't about creating fear around it, but what it's about is it's about creating awareness. And so as you begin to create awareness how all these things start to play a role, then there's the relationship with food, and I'm going to dive right in a second here about how that plays a role in how that influences your thoughts. But so that's kind of the macro, no pun intended, to these 3, idea of this, and that is that when you eat foods that are processed foods, sugar foods, right, things that are not really whole, good foods, and foods that are going to be on our list of the things that we're going to do, they're very difficult for the body to break down. And so that plays a role in influencing our thoughts. So we all, if I said, hey, where do our thoughts begin? We'd all point, to our head and think, hey, in our brain. And so Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical discovered something that they call the second brain, which is the ENS, the enteric nervous system. And it's a series of cells that reside in the intestines. And they are actually responsible for sending the signal impulses to what we would think of as our brain, our primary brain, this processor, and it affects that thinking. So when the gut, if you've ever heard, has anybody in here heard the term gut biome? It's a very kind of trending word that people talk about, but it's really this gut environment, and that is a big part about what we're influencing and how we're using that to actually change our exterior, right? So this system's about getting fit from the inside out, is how I talk about it. And so when you eat processed foods or foods that create inflammation, right? Like sugars and things like that, or even foods that, I'll give you one silly one, peanut butter. Peanuts are not peanuts. Peanuts are not nuts. They're legumes, and they're very difficult on the body, and they create a great deal of inflammation. Almost every single disease can be traced back to inflammation. Everything from arthritis to every stomach ailment to they link it to cancers, all kinds of everything. It really can be traced back to inflammation. So when we eat foods that create this inflammation, kill good gut bacteria, and cause this inflammation, that affects our thinking. So there's a neurotransmitter called serotonin. You've probably all heard of that, and I always have to go to this, but there's a very popular drug that's used in the world, Molly, MDMA, ecstasy. It started with a clinical use, and it floods the body with serotonin. And serotonin is, like I said, it's a neurotransmitter, but it's a neurotransmitter that is kind of the love drug or neurotransmitter, because it creates a sense of euphoria and love and well-being. So the thing is that 93% of serotonin in the human body resides in the gut. So this thing that we associate with our brain that creates how we feel, and do we feel good or do we not feel good, or something that we can do to make us feel good by increasing this, actually is back in this gut. So you start to see this kind of causal link between what's going on in here starts to affect what's going on in here. Now the byproduct of all of that is that affects what goes on out here, in terms of like holding body fat and all these other kinds of things. So anyways, the beauty is, the connection is as we get to what it takes to, improve this environment in our gut biome and how that affects our thoughts and these things, it's also the exact same process that helps us melt body fat and change this body composition. So it's a relationship with food, but it's a relationship which is through awareness, which also becomes a relationship with your own self, your own thoughts, your own kind of, power to really empower your own life. So that's what the goal is. And so before I get into kind of some of the systems around it, does anybody have any questions to that part right there? Make sense? Everybody kind of follow along on that? Okay. So I created a system, I call it Hot Fast 24, right? It's an acronym, you don't have to write it down. I'll give it to you, I have some literature for you guys. You're welcome to, I've got stuff for you here in your plan, but it's an acronym that stands for, I've spent 30 years developing this, right? And it stands for Hormone Optimization Transformation, and it utilizes fasting and strength training, and it's a 24-hour system and blueprint about essentially exactly what to do, when to do it, and yet that sounds very restrictive, and I think the ladies will attest to it. It's very intuitive once you get into it as well. So the fasting part, has anybody not heard of the term intermittent fasting? Okay, so, somebody raised their hand on the camera. I'm just, Merville, come on, put your hand up. So intermittent fasting is becoming, more and more of a craze, and it's a great one. I think it's fantastic. So that's one of the fundamental principles that we use in this relationship with food. And intermittent fasting for us, our goal to get to is what I call a 16-8. And 16 hours of fasting or time-restricted eating, and 8-hour window of eating. So that's a big central part to that, and there's a purpose behind that, which is how we optimize your natural hormones. Hormone clinics are popping up. I have a bunch of friends that own a whole bunch of them around the country. They're popping up everywhere, and they're wonderful things. They really, truly are. That's called exogenous hormones. Like if you take growth hormone or testosterone or any of those other kinds of things through an external, injection or pellets or creams or any of that kind of stuff, that's called that's exogenous hormones. What we're going to do is we treat it with a process called endogenous, meaning that we're going to create an environment where your body optimizes and creates more of the good hormones, being growth hormone, testosterone, which creates this environment, and we are down regulating at the same time what is like your fat hormone, because that's what makes you fat, right? It's not, everybody in this room is old enough to have been through all the diet crazes over the past, 20 years of fat-free, right? Like, oh, it's fat, we have to eliminate fat from the diet, and that raised the obesity rate at a higher percentage and rate ever in the history of our world, because it's simply not true. Fat is good for you, but it's just like anything. Good fat is good for you, not just fat. So we're going to get to what those sources are. They're in here. Don't worry about that. But so that's the process. Is through using this time-restricted eating and these windows, we mitigate cortisol and insulin so that they remain at bay. And by nature of that, we upregulate growth hormone and testosterone with that, which is what creates this environment for your body to just rapidly change. So, and then from the training perspective, right, from the exercise perspective, we meet once a week and we go through this training protocol where I've developed a specific set of exercises or body parts that are sequenced in a way to also do the same type of thing, which is to optimize your hormones, right? So that will help to raise, again, this growth hormone, testosterone, these things that help create an environment for our bodies to burn fat as fuel. It's called fat adapted, and we're going to get your bodies through these processes into a fat adapted state where you use that as an energy source. And it's actually wonderful. Your brain, I'll let the ladies, attest to it or not, but you think clearer, right? Energy levels, I think all of you reported that through the process. Everybody I've ever worked with that's done it, does. So it seems, it's very counterintuitive, especially for me coming from a world of bodybuilding where, we've been taught, and I preached, and I manufactured products, and I marketed products, and I followed research that I fully believed in. You have to eat every 2 hours. You have to be anabolic. You need your branched chain amino acids. You need to do all these kinds of things so that we can grow muscle and be in an anabolic state as much as possible. And I'm going to tell you, after being a thought leader and an expert or whatever you want to call it, and a marketer in those processes, it's simply wrong. And so that's how I got here. Is as I started to change everything I believed, and then changed everything that I did, it changed all my results. And what I look for, the key word in anything, whether it be business or particularly in health, is sustainable results, right? Because that's what led me to this process, was through these other kind of styles of training and dieting and so forth. I know personally I went through it, and thousands of people who compete in the world and everything go through this, that you could really kind of work yourself into like this fantastic shape, right? Stage shape. In Tampa right now, it's the Tampa Pro. It's one of the biggest bodybuilding shows in the country. I have a bunch of friends over there competing today, and people are at this peak moment. Right now, literally, some people are getting on stage right now that have peaked to that moment, and they look amazing. The thing is that's not sustainable, right? And they don't mean it to be, right? They don't want it to be. But that's my laboratory that I come from, about how to manipulate body fat as low as possible and maximize muscle at the same time through these processes. And but for me, it felt hollow because I didn't want to look great for 5 minutes and then not look great later. And so now I turned 50 on Tuesday, and the older I get, the more I've gotten into this place where it's like, I want to be as good as I can the rest of my life. I'm looking at each decade, 50 and 60 and 70. And so where's the longevity from that? That's why I go to hormones, but our own hormones, not using them externally, and upregulating all the good stuff, downregulating the bad stuff, and this system will do that from it. So I guess I'll stop there for a second and see if there's any questions to that. I know it's a lot of kind of information in terms. I don't know if you're familiar with some of these, the insulins and cortisols and the roles they play. And ultimately, it really probably doesn't matter. If you follow this, it'll do those things. It's kind of like it's the old saying of everybody likes to eat sausage, they just don't want to see how it's made, right? So if you have that mindset, which is, I don't really care what's going on in here, just lead me to that, this blueprint will take you there, and following this, the more religiously you follow it, the more your results will come. This is 100% based in science. This isn't just kind of like a theory or any of these kinds of things. I'll give you a couple numbers around it. Testosterone, using intermittent fasting, testosterone increases have been documented to be up to 180% increase of testosterone. That is, if I could make a product and make a clinical claim that this product increases testosterone by 180%, it would blow away the universe. It really would. I mean, it's an unfathomable number without actually injecting testosterone to get that type of increase. And yet, through this process, that happens, right? And I think even with my system, which I haven't put into the clinical results on this yet, I think we actually even blow that away, because our exercise program also does more to even help that. And that wasn't part of the studies that were used to get to that. The second part of it is the other super powerful hormone to change body composition the way we want to, increase muscle, reduce body fat, is growth hormone, right? Growth hormone is at the genesis of cellular repair. It's the fountain of youth, right? It's what Ponce de Leon was really looking for, that fountain of youth. It's growth hormone. The problem is, if you take growth hormone and inject it and use that as kind of this, external hormone, it indiscriminately replicates cells. And so if you have bad cells in your body, that's why I don't recommend using it, right? I would not use growth hormone from that standpoint. But your body, when it does it, it knows how to do that appropriately. So growth hormone is at the root of repairing all our cells, and so skin gets tighter. Just every single metabolic function improves through growth hormone, because that's how our body recovers. So another phenomenal thing. And here's the thing. Using this process, it's been measured, documented, up to 2,000% increase of growth hormone. It truly is, if you're used to looking at numbers, it's unfathomable of what that is. And so these are these tailwinds that we're using. So you've got science behind you. It's not a question of belief as to, well, I don't know if this system works, because there's a million systems out there, right? And there's a million different protocols. There's a million different diets, and people are getting success with all of them, and there's research around, or most of them, right? There's research around them, oh, you should do this, you should do that, and it's kind of hard to know what is it. This is documented, science-based, it's unequivocal, it will give you results if you can follow it. And I think it's pretty easy to follow. It does take a little, it's like any major change in your life, it does take a little bit of adaptation time, right? And change can be uncomfortable. Well, change is uncomfortable, but the beauty is it's in discomfort where we actually grow. And you're going to find that out in our workouts as well too, because that's at one of the core fundamental processes of what it takes. It's a critical success factor, is that when we meet, and I guess it's Wednesdays, I think, we'll figure out the time. I think it's 6 or 6:30. Bill asked if we could change that, so we do need to get clarification before we leave with Bill on that today. But when we meet, when you guys show up, I don't want this to sound scary, but your goal when you show up, this is going to be the only thing you do in life where you show up with the singular goal to fail. If you don't fail, you don't succeed. We have to fail, because what we're doing, our bodies are simply adapting machines, right? It's going to adapt to the diet things that we're going to do. It's going to adapt to the change in hormones, and we're going to create a stimulus that your body has to fail to overcome, right? Make sense? So it's kind of a cool, again, I like the kind of counterintuitive process, wait, I'm going to grow by not eating? That doesn't make sense from everything that I've ever read in any, fitness type magazine or publication. That makes no sense. I'm here to fail. I'm going to grow, yes, that's where we grow, right? So we'll do it in a positive way, and we'll do it in the right way. So there's when it comes to the exercise part, there's 3 rules or critical success factors to which I leverage. The first is mind-muscle connection. When we exercise, we're going to do 13 exercises when we train together. Those 13 exercises are in a specific sequence that are designed to, again, promote hormone releases, growth hormone, testosterone that your body has to respond to. Another component that it does, which is really unique to anything else, is it's designed in this order to also move lymph through the body, right? So lymph is how our body detoxifies, and lymph, unlike our other, there's our lymphatic system. It doesn't have
to move.
You have to move it. You're exactly right.
It doesn't move itself.
That's right. It requires muscle to move lymph through the body. So we train in a system that moves it up through the body and helps you to detoxify and process from that as well too. So you're exactly right. All these things are really about optimizing your health, your performance, your health, and your wellness, and the byproduct is that this body composition changes from that perspective. So it's going to be mind-muscle connection. I'll help you guys work through that. Where when we're exercising, I always use bicep as the example because it's such an easy one to demonstrate. If you go into any gym right now and you watch people lift, you're going to see them swinging heavy weights and lifting, especially like a more hardcore gym or whatever, lifting and trying to lift heavy and lift with your ego, and in that process, thinking about getting the weight just up as opposed to contracting the muscle. And we're the antithesis of that. In fact, we're going to use less weight than you've ever used before because that's what's going to allow you. If you've never lifted before, great. Then you have no bad habits and it's going to be really easy to get you into this. If you've lifted a lot before, and if you're strong, it's harder, right, to reprogram yourself as to, you're going to lift less, But I usually use, 30 pounds here. Grab the 15s, grab the 10s. Because that's what's going to allow you to be light enough to focus on that. We want just that. We're going to work all the muscles when we're together, but we want just that one muscle to fail in that one time. And so if you're swinging and you're recruiting other muscles, you're getting fatigued from other areas. So that's what I call mind-muscle connection. The second component, and these are all based in science as well, is called time under tension. And time under tension simply means that the amount of time that the muscle has a stimulus on it. And that's what matters. So if you're swinging weights, right, one time under tension can be the number of times that you lift something, right? If you lift something one time, even if you do it with perfect mind-muscle connection, there's not a lot of time under tension on that, right? Pacing that you go at affects time under tension, number of reps, but also that focus does, because if I watched CrossFit Games last night. I'm not a CrossFit fan. Personally, I respect them. I respect anybody who competes, and at that level, I think it's great. But it's the antithesis of what's wrong about if you're trying to change your body composition, right? It's a competition. I love competition. I respect sport. I respect all those people who compete. The people who are showing up in CrossFit gyms because they want to get in shape, I cringe, because it's the worst thing you can do. Because you see these pull-ups that they do. It's all about swinging and getting from a point A to point B. That's quantity. That has nothing to do with quality. And the quality is that if we're doing a pull-up, we're focused on the lat muscle, right? And it's about getting that contraction. So it's that time under tension as we get to that. The mind-muscle connection, that's all I'm working, not using my abs and my biceps and every other body part to try to swing that up there. So it's those two factors, and then the third is this failure, this intensity to failure. And so that's a really interesting one as well too, about how the mind works into this, right? Back to the mind, and the reason why I'm so focused in mind is that one of my favorite quotes from Henry Ford is, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. There's a million ways to say that exact same thing, right? Your attitude determines your altitude. What you think about, you bring about. All these different kinds of things. They touch on the exact same factor. And so having that proper mindset is what is going to get us there. Your mind plays a role to try to protect us. It's really your subconscious, right? Your subconscious it's really just trying to protect us from what we think will make us uncomfortable, harm us, anything like that. So your brain is going to tell you, yeah, I've had enough. 10 reps, right? How many times am I supposed to do this? And so if you count you're thinking, oh, I gotta do 10. Body can't count to 10. It has no idea. So we have to learn to push past mental failure and get into physical failure. So that's the intensity and failure part. Mind also plays, those are the 3 components, and you'll learn those through our exercises. And I was impressed at how fast everybody, it takes some time, right? I mean, I know Andy was a great communicator, and I'm not, this sounds at first like a backhanded compliment. She'd be over there and she's like looking at me kind of lost, and she's kind of the last one, which was great. It did, to your own beat, you're like, I don't know if I feel this in the right place, which was awesome because it allowed me to go over, get close with her and say, no, here, let me help you here. Do you feel this here? Oh, now I feel it. And by the end, you were running with it. Yeah. And it doesn't matter, like being the first one to finish is probably not a good thing, quite frankly, right? Did you give up mentally, or did you? That would be my question when somebody would finish it. Like, did you fail? Did you fail physically or mentally? That's that challenge, right? That's where we're going to get to. We use that exact same mindset when it gets to the diet side to it, which is so important, right? The way I talk about the two, kind of the 2 components about the success factors here is that obviously we've got diet and we've got the training side to it. Those are the 2 components. What I say is 80% of your success comes from your diet. In the world of bodybuilding, we used to say you can't out-drug a diet, right? You can't take the hormones and peptides and things, that outweigh that. You can't. The way I say it is, you can't. I don't use any. I have no issues with it. I have no problems. I don't use any. So I'm 100% natural because I feel like that's the only way I can relate to people, right? Is if I'm using performance enhancing things, then how do I know that that's not what's giving me the success? Which is why I always chose my whole life not to. Because for me, it's about teaching, right? It's about giving this to other people, creating systems that they can use. So it's 80% diet, but and so the training part is only 20% of your success, but it's kind of like a cover charge of getting into like a nightclub or something. You gotta pay that to get in. It ain't gonna happen without it. So it's a critical part of it, but it's only 20% of your success rate of where that comes in. So let's get to the 80% of what we're going to do is the diet side to it. So just like we have to start to kind of question, are we giving up because our mind is telling us to give up, or are we giving up because our body's telling us to give up? We're going to use that exact same principle on a daily basis in terms of your food intake. And so you'll find this, almost every one of you, I know you wrote about it to me, Terry, about your experience, learning the difference between mental hunger and physical hunger. And mental hunger can also be / emotional hunger, right? Or just habitual hunger, patterns of what we're used to, and how you're not eating because you're actually physically hungry and you need it. You're eating out of boredom, absolutely. I call that emotional, but yeah. Absolutely. And just even patterns too, like, oh, this is my show and I always eat this, well, whatever it is, these kinds of things. And so this is part of, at the root of the relationship with food, right? Starting to understand that. I think boredom is a great one. The other part is that realistically, besides those types of emotional triggers around stuff like that, stress is another one, right? Too, I don't think Bill would mind me sharing this, but he went through it a lot in the beginning. He was going through a stressful time. And what I recognized with him was that when he was stressed, he wanted to reach for something sweet. And so I shared with him that that's dopamine, right? Are you guys familiar? Yeah. That's a neurotransmitter as well. And sugar is more addictive than cocaine. If you guys all seen that study, they did a rat study with that, and they took them through the whole process. You guys are all nodding yes, so you know it. So literally, it's very addictive, right? And it's, that's going to give me a quick hit to feel good. Much like cocaine or other drugs or things like that, it's not going to give you sustainable success from something like that, right? It has a diminishing effect, all the things we talked about in the gut biome and how that affects everything else. So you'll learn these emotional triggers around it is some of it. And so the other part though too is, and especially for us in Florida and in the summer, is that realistically even as you start to get past those emotional sides to it and think, oh, I'm hungry, very frequently, more times than not, you're not actually physically hungry, you're thirsty. And if you try to pay attention to your craving at that time, some of it may be habitual, but if you think about, what do I feel like right now? What do I really want? If it's anything salty in particular, that is 100% signal from your body trying to get water, right? Because it uses the sodium to pull water. So even if you didn't, one is, hey, if I eat something salty, my body will probably tell me to go, take a drink of water. But at the same time, it can actually pull water from the cell using that. So it's not even about manipulating your behavior. By the way, I'm not telling you to carry one around. I do, because it just is so, I drink constantly. And when you're full with water, it makes it very, very easy to have that fuller feeling, which is something that you're going to go through as we start the intermittent fasting side to it. Is it's a difference of what that is, and we'll start getting into food in just a second here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so you see the mind, right? The mind is going to determine our success here. It's going to determine our success through our ability to fail in the right way out here, physically, not mentally. And it's going to determine our success in the food aspect to it as to, can I get to my 16-hour window, right? Not everybody's going to start at 16 hours. Some people are going to be like, hey, it's real easy for me. I was at, some people are at 16 like that. Some people, it takes a while, and that's okay. It doesn't matter what anybody else is, where they are. It's about where we get to, and I'll help you through that process. I think it's pretty easy to kind of step into it, and I don't think we had a single person who, after a few weeks, was not adhering to that 16-8, at least a majority of the time. So we'll get to what that is, but that it's gonna mess with you a little bit at first as to, I know it did. I'll just share with you, and then the other part is the macros, right? That we eat full meals. When we eat in our window, and we'll go over that in a second, but when we eat in our window, you eat a complete meal every single time. And by a complete meal, I mean protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And it'll be down to a specific amount for fairly individualized for you guys. Well, individualized, but they're pretty similar across the board for you guys. And then I'll make adjustments as I need to as we manipulate change through that process. But that is part of it that will also kind of help you with this process of physical hunger versus emotional hunger. Because, and I'll just share with you, when I first got into this methodology of eating this way, which was, I think, 14 years ago now, I started with a prep coach, and it was a new approach for me. And it essentially was when I was hungry, which is what you guys are going to do too. You guys are going to fast for 16 hours. You're going to eat in your 8-hour window. I'm going to give you, in a second, we'll walk through those. You'll have a protocol on how you break a fast, right? It's the one time we do something a little bit different. So that's an outlier. We'll set that aside for a second. After that, then you will eat when you're hungry. It's very intuitive at that point. It's not, oh, it's 3 o'clock, I gotta eat. Only you know that, right? Your body, you're gonna find that, like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat. You'll eat your meal, right? It'll consist of protein, carbohydrates, and fats. I have sources for you on what those are, what you'll eat from. Can help you with recipes and how to put cool foods together that I think you guys will all attest to it. Food tastes really good when you do it this way because fat tastes good. Being able, it's not restrictive to where, oh, I can't have this. Sources, yes, but fruits and vegetables are your carbohydrate sources. Carbohydrates are not bad. It's kind of like fat. Bad carbohydrates are bad. Fruits and vegetables are great. And then some protein sources around that. But to my experience, I remember I was so conditioned to eating, and I thought, oh, I'm hungry, I've got to eat. And I looked, and I knew I had to eat this full meal of macros. I was like, oh my God, I'm starving, but I can't eat all that. There's no way I can eat that much right now, because I was used to more like snacking, like we've kind of been taught over time. Snacking is not going to help you in this because it triggers these hormones. So we'll eat on these full meals, and you'll find, I suspect that pretty much every one of you will experience at some time thinking you're hungry and then looking, going, I can't eat that much food. What diet have you ever been on which says, that's too much food, I can't eat that, right? You know, so it's kind of it's a good thing around that as you get used to it. So maybe what I'll do is give you guys your sheets, and then we can kind of like look at what some of the foods are and sources and how that will work. There's 3 pages. I could just pass it down maybe.
I'm not snapping. I'm eating a full meal over here.
Say again?
I said I am not snapping. I'm eating a full meal over here.
Atta girl, I like that, right? She did.
Oh, we're going around this way. Okay.
Okay. I have 5. Are we gonna make you a copy, or I'll email it to you? Maybe this, I don't know if Bill has a copy machine. I don't know why I only
Take
printed.
a picture. We were short on our.
Yeah, that's what you did last time, didn't you? Exactly.
I never have a copy
Yeah,
of
you
it.
did the exact same thing. I apologize.
I can just take a picture with my phone and copy it all.
I'm happy to email it to you too, right? Or maybe Bill has a copy machine or something, but.
Okay.
You want me to go see if he's got a printer or something out there?
Would you? That'd be great. Atta girl. Can I look at yours with you?
Yeah.
Just to see, so that I can kind of walk you guys through it. So, I talked to you guys about the hot fast, right? You know, it's this 8-week program that we're going to do, what it stands for. It's kind of a recap of the things. That's why I said you don't really have to take notes. You're welcome to, but I think I hit most of what we kind of talked about in here. Let's get to. So I'll start with the example, which is really at the top of page 2 here. In terms of what does a 16:8 window kind of look like, right? So as an example, if you have your last meal, so I really have to stop using that term. I'm so used to meals. Last caloric intake, right? Anything that you eat that had, because you say, well, I had dinner at 6, but maybe I had whatever it is, something later. If it has calories in it, if it has a caloric response, if it has a glycemic response in particular, but any caloric response, it triggers insulin. That's the marker. That's what we're going off of, is when's the last time we trigger insulin. So I call it a meal. Soon you guys will call it a meal too, because you guys will be eating at meals on this. But the last time that you eat food, let's say it's 8 p.m., and getting to a 16-hour window, it would mean that, no, okay. It would mean that your first intake now of calories of food, of something, and there's one exception we'll get to in this that will help you get through there, would be at noon the next day. So if you think about that, it's really, for all intents and purposes, simply skipping breakfast. And just as a quick aside, you know, we've been told for a while, you know, hey, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? It's breakfast of champions, how to start your day. And breakfast was actually invented, believe it or not, by Henry Ford. Back to that damn Henry Ford again. Actually, I love him, but and it was during the Depression time. And in order to get workers to come to work, he promised them breakfast, right? Because people had difficulty getting Detroit, right? Yeah, sure. And so he used that as to, we'll feed you and we'll give you that. And so it really started from that. Our bodies really don't do well with it, and you'll start to see out of this. But that aside, for all intents and purposes, if you eat at 8 p.m., your next meal would be at noon, which is really just skipping breakfast. Now, the thing about that is what I'm not telling you is that, okay, so stop eating at 8, right? This is where we want to run intuitively through this. I'm going to tell you how many meals. I'm going to give you these macros, and then it's one of the things that we'll track is you tell me how many times you'll see some reporting things for each week that each of you will give me that I'll work with you as we to see how we need to evolve this. And one of the questions I have is, tell me how many times you're eating. I'm not telling you how many times to eat. You guys will tell me how many times you're eating based on that, and we'll make changes as it needs to be. Because I want you to be intuitive in this one with with these parameters. I want you to eat when you're hungry, drink when you're thirsty, learn the difference, right? You know, that's really the core principle and foundation and part of your awareness with food that comes in on that. So, but the beauty is that if it's got to fit to your schedule, right? Some people have very different schedules. Hey, I eat whatever. I work at nights and I eat my last food at midnight. Okay, then start your clock at midnight. And we want to try to get to 16 hours, right? That's the goal. So whenever you set it, and I will tell you this, is even though I personally am very routine based, my time changes virtually every single day. I just make a mental note. I'm developing an app right now, actually, that'll make it really, really easy to be able to put that in. But set yourself a timer, right? You know, write it down. Whatever it is, you know, anything you need to do is say, oh, okay, my last at 7:42, right? If you want to get to the minute, and then, you know, you can do the math real quick and go, oh, all right, 11:42. My window opens back up. Now I can eat again, and in the beginning, you'll most certainly probably jump right at that window, you know, be like, oh my God, thank God I made it, now I'm gonna eat. And then you'll find yourself, I think almost every single person says, do I have to eat at 16 hours? What if I'm not hungry? That's when you know it's starting to click and you start to really kind of figure that out. And it goes when you're hungry. You know, I really want it to be about intuitive, but we are so based in these habits of what it is, the emotional, the boredom, the triggers, these other environmental things, and so it'll evolve from you out of that. But so that's the goal, is the 16. What I say is, if that's difficult, you do the best you can. You know, we're going to track this. We'll individually, you'll be able to communicate with me in this and let me know. But 12 hours, pretty much for anybody. This is the kind of the secret behind the whole thing is, say you sleep for 8 hours. Right? It does have to work for you. It's really not that difficult. Can you go 4 hours before you go to sleep and 4 hours once you wake up, you know, or whatever the combination is to get there? It's not that hard from that process to it. So, but 12 hours, you know, if you're having troubles, let's work for the 12 hours, 8 to 8. That shouldn't be too difficult. And then if that's where you are, and again, you know, communicate through this process, but if that's where you are, it's like, you know what, I had my last food at 8, and at 8 a.m., I had to eat. I was getting on an airplane, I was doing whatever the environmental factor is that drove you there. Okay, you got 12 hours. Now, the way that we'll try to adjust from that is we'll bump an hour at either side, right? So the next day, or next opportunity, try to go 7 to 9. Right? Just adding that 1 hour on either end of the clock, you're at 14, you do that twice, you're in. And it really is, and so, why 16 though, right? Why is 16? Well, why not the 12 or the 14 or the 16? At 16 hours, when we make it to 16 hours, our body goes through a process called autophagy, which is where every day we have trillions of cells in our body. And every day, billions and billions of cells are dying and being born and replicating, right? Our bodies are continually rejuvenating. Just in the gut alone, this happens at the gut wall. And that's something we'll talk about because that's a protocol here. It's the one variable that we have, variable different factor here, and that our bodies are continually regenerating. So when our body gets into this process called autophagy, what happens is it really speeds that process up. And kind of an easy way to think about it is that it stops giving energy and nutrients to the cells that are dying so that they slough off faster, and it only sends what it needs to the new emerging ones, and so your body replenishes that much faster. Adding growth hormone at the same time, and that's how our bodies really, really change from this. So if you have like things like acid reflux, any type of, was that a yes?
Yeah, they just told me I had. I said, no, I don't. They said, yeah, you do. And I went, no, I don't. They, yes, you do. I was like, okay.
Not for long, right?
Yeah.
We'll prove them wrong pretty quickly, I think. And I have a little secret thing that's part of the protocol that'll help that even more so. But if you have things like that, use using intermittent fasting and apple cider vinegar is a big part too. I've yet to work with anybody who hasn't eliminated that really quickly. Because your gut lining, just like we talked about those cells breaking down, your gut lining is continuously breaking down, and then if we give it the right foods, right, it's rebuilding itself back to that gut biome that's there. So that is our one kind of one little variable that I like to throw in here is when we break your fast, right? I like to do something a little bit differently. So let's say we get to the 16 hours, and we've already talked about that part of that 16 hours is that we haven't gotten an insulin response. We haven't stimulated insulin. So real quick, in case you don't know, what insulin's job is to pull sugar out of the blood, right? You know, everything kind of breaks down into that, and then so it takes sugar out of the blood and it moves it into the cell. Insulin resistance, you've heard that term before, and you can, if you hold body fat around your midsection, that is a definite sign of insulin resistance. And so that's just what your body does. And what the reason why that happens is that you develop, when we're triggering insulin too frequently, too often, it can no longer get it into the cell. So we think of insulin as being like a key, and it grabs the sugar, it takes it to the cell, and it opens up the cell, and it pulls it out of the blood, and it dumps it into the cell, where the cell can use this as energy. When you start to get too much of that insulin, and insulin is kind of like slow in terms of like getting the regulation signal back to it, which is, hey, we got enough, we don't need any more. It starts, because we eat so frequently and do these things and these foods that trigger it. You've heard the term glycemic index before, right? That's the amount of insulin response a food triggers off of that. So when you get that insulin and it's coming in, the cells, the key no longer works to the cell. So this insulin, this transporter, has gathered this sugar and it can't get into the cell. It can't get into the next cell. It can't get into the next cell. So what it does is it takes it and it has to store it somewhere. That's how we store body fat. So that's the role of insulin and insulin resistance. And then insulin resistance can lead into diabetes, right? That's where that goes to. That's the process by what that happens, how that happens. I work with a few diabetics right now, a couple CEOs that are diabetic, and both of them that I'm working with right now have reduced their insulin intake. In the second one I'm with right now, he's at 3 weeks today, and his insulin has been reduced by 70%. He sent me a graph. He's a private equity, big CEO of a private equity firm, and he sent me a graph. Right, we're always talking about companies and things, and he sent me this graph the other day, and I didn't know it was related to this, and it was just a straight line. I was like, that's a shitty looking company. What is that? And I blew it up, and I looked at it, and I was like, it's pretty static. And he said, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, right? So I look at it, and it was his blood sugar. He said, I've never had this stable of a blood sugar in my entire life. So if that's happening with diabetics, imagine what's happening when your body is actually functioning, well or decent or not yet at that state. And so that byproduct of this is that if we're not having that difficulty of getting that those cells unlocked, we're not storing the body fat. That's how this process happens. That's how we get fit from the inside out and transform this through this hormone optimization. So taking advantage of going 16 hours without an insulin response, now we want to use it. This is our protocol, and it's in here about the one. It's breaking your daily fast. It's that section in the third page. This is the one alternate protocol, and then we'll go back to food sources after this. But because we're kind of going linear in terms of your day, 16-hour fast. What's the protocol? How we break that fast? So now we're going to use insulin to our advantage, right? We just talked about all the disadvantages of insulin and what it does. Now we haven't triggered insulin in 16 hours, so we're not resistant. It's going to really work. So we want to use that to our advantage. So this is the one time that we'll take something that's different from our sources list. And I like to use a rice cake for this because that's a very high glycemic food in response. So meaning it's going to trigger a lot of insulin. We're going to trigger insulin anything. And by the way, it's not just sugars that trigger insulin. Protein triggers insulin. Fat triggers insulin. Maybe not at the same level. If anybody here has ever used the product, branched chain amino acids, right? There are people that say, oh, I fast and I just sip branched chain amino acids while I'm fasting. They're not fasting because it's not that you care, but it's leucine, right? The branched chain amino acids are 3 amino acids, and one of them is called leucine. It's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Leucine sends a signal to the brain that you've eaten, and it triggers insulin. So, anyways, that aside, we've gone 16 hours without this. We're going to supercharge this insulin. We want to use it to our advantage. Right now, it's a super key, right? Going back to that kind of analogy, how it's going to open that cell. Okay, great. What we want to do is use that to open the cell, and then the other thing that we take with it is I'm a big fan of bone broth, right? You can do beef. They have chicken, bone broth. And what that is that they slow boil these, and it extracts the bone marrow out of it and the collagen. And so collagen is at the cellular repair level, which is amazing for the gut lining, right? So we've also gone 16 hours without creating an acidic environment, which is what starts to kind of cause this acid reflux, right? And what that's going on. So we've got 16 hours without that. But your gut wall is still breaking down because there's still acids in there, right? So that wall's breaking down. Now we eat the rice cake. We trigger this insulin that creates this great delivery system. We add in the bone broth with it, which is now going to bring this collagen to repair, and it helps to realign the gut at that point. And that creates this kind of protection environment for this gut biome that we got back to, which is at the center of these thoughts that we have. You start to see how it all starts to kind of fit together and put that together. So that's the one time we want to do that a little bit differently. If you can't do bone broth or you don't want to do bone broth, and I'm happy to recommend a couple brands. I'm not affiliated with anything. I don't manufacture one. I buy it, I'll tell you the ones I like that I use. Do you have a question?
Well, there's different bone broths
Sure.
out there, and with everybody going off the trend of doing the bone broth, I'm afraid that I do some of the boxed ones,
Mm-hmm.
like Swanson or whatever, and
Mhm.
what are those not good, cheaper, or because they say they're bone broth, is that cool, or do I go to the fancy meat store where I got the gelatin type? I mean,
I tend to do more of that.